For more than 3,000 years, the history books listed China's second dynasty, the Shang, as settled fact. Then by the early 20th century, a generation of scholars decided those books were wrong. The Shang, they argued, was a legend invented long after the fact, just like the Shah before it. Then in the 1890s, a sick scholar in Beijing was given his medicine, ground-up dragon bones, sold by apothecaries as an ancient cure. And on those fragments, he noticed something impossible, the oldest writing ever found in China. Those bones did not cure him. They did something far stranger. They dragged an entire lost dynasty back from the dead, and with it a whole Bronze Age world of towering bronzes, royal tombs, and human sacrifice. The Shang was the first Chinese dynasty that could actually be proven to exist. It really did come back from the dead, and the civilization it brought with it is just as extraordinary. For centuries, almost everything known about the Shang came from a single source, the historian Sima Qian, who listed its kings around 100 BCE, nearly 1,000 years after the dynasty had already fallen. The text told a familiar tale. A virtuous rebel named Tang overthrew the last tyrant of the Xia and founded the Shang, a royal line that would rule for more than 500 years through some 30 kings. But there was not a shred of physical proof, and in the 1920s, a circle of Chinese scholars began to argue that the Shang, like the Xi, might be nothing more than a story invented long after the fact. The answer was already lying in plain sight and being slowly eaten. For generations, farmers near Anyang had dug up strange old bones and shells, which were ground into powder and sold in pharmacies as medicine. In 1899, the scholar Wang Yirong looked closely at these so-called dragon bones and realized the marks on them were not natural cracks, but characters, an early form of Chinese writing over 3,000 years old. They were oracle bones. The Shang kings had used them to question the future. A query was carved into the bone, heat was applied until it cracked, and a diviner read the answer in the lines, then recorded it in the bone itself. Scholars traced the bones back to their source, the fields around the village of Xiaotun, near Anyang. Beneath that quiet farmland lay Yinshu, the ruins of Yin, the last lost capital of the Shang dynasty. And carved among the bones were the names of kings. When the scholar Wang Gowei read them out, they matched Sima Qian's list of Shang rulers almost exactly. The legend had just confirmed itself in the king's own words. So in 1928, the excavations began in earnest. What emerged from the earth at Anyang would prove, beyond all doubt, that the Shang were real and uncover one of the great civilizations of the ancient world. The Shang were master metal workers, and bronze was the very heart of their power. They cast it not by hammering, but by pouring molten metal into elaborate clay molds, a method unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. Their foundries worked bronze on a staggering scale. The greatest survivor, the Humuwu Ding, is a single ritual cauldron weighing more than 800 kilograms, the heaviest piece of bronze to come down to us from the entire ancient world. These vessels were not for cooking. They were sacred, used to offer food and wine to the ancestors, whose spirits the Shang believed could reach back and shape the fortunes of the living. For the Shang, power ran through the dead. All of it centered on a great capital the Shang called Yin, a sprawl of timber and earth palaces, royal tombs, and roaring bronze foundries beside the Yellow River, a city of tens of thousands of people. And at the heart of that city stood the king, who ruled as the high priest of his people, the one man who could address the gods and the ancestors and read their answers in the cracks of a burning bone. The oracle bones preserved his every worry. Would the harvest hold? Would the rains come? Would the queen survive childbirth? Would the next campaign succeed? More than 150,000 of these inscribed bones have now been found. And the script upon them is the direct ancestor of the Chinese characters written today. Of some 4,500 distinct signs, scholars can read around 1,500, enough to let the Shang become the first Chinese dynasty to speak to us in its own voice. The bones even named a remarkable woman, Lady Fu Hao, a consort of King Wu Ding. She was far more than a royal wife. She was a high priestess and a general who led Shang armies of up to 13,000 soldiers into battle. When her tomb was uncovered at Anyang in 1976, it was the only Shang royal tomb ever found intact. Inside lay over 1,600 kilograms of bronze, hundreds of jade carvings, and the great bronze war axes that were the badge of her command. Cities, chariots, writing, armies, art. A queen who led men into war. The Shang were beyond any doubt one of the world's great Bronze Age civilizations, the equal of Egypt and Mesopotamia, risen on the Yellow River. But the Shang world had a darker face, one the ancient texts barely admit, and which only the earth laid bare. Among the palaces and the bronzes, archaeologists kept uncovering the bones of the sacrifice. The Shang practiced human sacrifice on a vast scale. In their royal tombs and ritual pits lie thousands of victims, a great many of them prisoners of war, taken from a neighboring people the Shang called the Chang. To the Shang, this was not cruelty but devotion. The ancestors and the high god, Di, had to be fed, and a human life was the most powerful offering of all. It was a faith quite literally written in blood. For more than 5 centuries, the dynasty endured. Its golden age under King Wu Ding, its final capital at Yin, standing for nearly 300 years. And then the Shang came to its 30th and last king. His name was Di Xin. In the histories, every one of them written by the dynasty that destroyed him, he is a monster, a cruel and drunken tyrant who tortured the innocent and feasted while his people starved. But here we have to be careful because those stories grew darker with each passing century. In the earliest accounts, Di Xin is merely a weak and foolish ruler. Only much later does he swell into the cartoon villain of legend. Many historians now suspect it is largely propaganda, including the scheming concubine Daji, blamed for bewitching him, who appears nowhere in the Shang's own records. The victors, as always, wrote the history. Whatever the man was truly like, his dynasty was crumbling. To the west had risen a vassal people, the Zhou, and around 1046 BCE, their ruler, King Wu, with his strategist, Zhang Zia, marched against the Shang. The two armies met at Muyang. The Shang vastly outnumbered the Zhou, but their main army was far away in the east, and the capital was defended by hastily armed slaves and war captives, with no reason to die for Di Xin. As the battle began, those slave soldiers turned on their own king, throwing down their spears and going over to the enemy. Later texts claim the blood ran deep enough to float a log. Even ancient writers doubted that. The Shang line broke and scattered. Di Xin fled back to his palace, heaped his treasures around him on a great terrace, set it alight, and burned to death in the ruins of his own dynasty. The The victorious Zhou now had to explain how they could overthrow a dynasty that ruled by divine right. So they proclaimed a powerful new idea, the mandate of heaven. A corrupt king forfeits heaven's blessing, and it passes to a worthier one. It is the very same idea the Zhou would later stamp onto the fall of the Xia, the same tale of a noble founder and a final tyrant told twice over. In the fall of the Shang, we can almost watch that template being made. The Shang themselves did not entirely disappear. Their royal line lived on as the lords of a small state called Song, and their ways of casting bronze and honoring ancestors flowed onward into the Zhou and every dynasty to come. But their greatest legacy was the writing on those bones. From the oracle bone script descends every Chinese character written since, an unbroken chain of more than 3,000 years, the oldest living writing system on Earth. And remember how all of this came back. For 3,000 years, the Shang, too, was dismissed as a myth, until the Earth gave up its bones and proved that the old stories had been true all along. Which leaves one haunting thought. If the Shang, once written off as legend, proved to be real, then perhaps the Xia, the dynasty before it, is not waiting in a storybook after all. Perhaps it is still waiting in the ground. A sick scholar bought some medicine, and a civilization 3,000 years dead began to speak again, in the very characters 1 billion people still write today. Empires fall, people remain.